have the pleasure of introducing our first speaker, who is Michelle Jones-London from NIH, and she is from the Office of Programs to Enhance Neuroscience Workforce Diversity, which is called the Open Office, which I totally love, Office Programs to Enhance Neuroscience. And Michelle has a very strong record in helping build workforces and scientific groups. She's been with NIH. She first started working with NIH in 2004, I think, but she's in charge of the diversity training and workforce development at NINDS, but also does a lot of trans NIH work. And we are happy to have her come and speak to us today about NIH strategies for enhancing the diversity of neuroscience researchers. So the importance of keeping neuroscience research diverse.
You just have flown in, so hopefully I'll keep the energy up, because I know a lot of you are probably tired. So hopefully I can do that. And also the talk, it'll be a little bit like Choose Your Own Adventure. Do you remember the Choose Your Own Adventure books? Of course, from where I sit, our programs go all the way from high school to junior faculty. We have institutional programs and individual programs. And so some of the programs that I'll tell you about, they'll apply to you yourself. You will think, great, I can get money. Some of them you'll say, as a mentor, I can bring someone in my lab and use these resources. And some of them are just things to think about when it comes to inclusion and diversity. And so hopefully you'll leave this talk with everybody getting a little bit of something out of it. In terms of how I'll structure this, I'll start off with a bigger point of view about what is the NIH, because I'm often surprised. People sort of view the NIH as this black box, or when we say the NIH, as this very, one institution, and it really isn't. It's a really bigger 27 institutes and centers. I also talk about why and what is and where along the path of diversity in terms of the strategies that NINDS has tried to employ, and then highlight some of the NINDS diversity programs, of course not all of them, and then sort of weave in here what we can do at the scientific community level, the institutional level, and at the individual level to help think about diversity and inclusion. So first of all, about the NIH. The NIH really works on two levels. It's the extramural research that we fund. This is over 2,500 different institutions, 300,000 scientists and research personnel, and we receive about 70,000 applications. Don't get overwhelmed by that, because I know part of their goals of this course is that you are going to think about submitting to us, and so you could be one of those numbers. There's no need to feel as though you can't see yourself there. The other part of it is intramural research. A lot of people don't know that the NIH itself has scientists and research activities, not only PIs, but also there are postdocs. There are people who do their postdoc research there, and also there's even partnerships with certain graduate programs where graduate students are there. And like I said, it really is 27 institutes and centers. Here you will hear a lot about NINDS because that's who's funding you and that's who's largely represented. But within the neuroscience field, there's a lot of collaboration between other neuroscience ICs as well. And so just keep that in mind. As I talk about things, I, of course, will talk about them from the perspective of the NINDS, but other neuroscience institutes as well have similar programs, but they may handle things differently, because once you've spoken to one NIH institute, you've spoken to one NIH institute. Unfortunately for you out there who sometimes get pretty confused, and you can say, well, the program officer told me this, and it is true for that institute, but another institute may handle it differently. So the other theme that you'll hear that I'll say is really talk to your program officers. That's our job. That's what we're there for. Don't listen to what they say or what you've heard. Really take the time, if you're interested in some of the programs, to then reach out to the program officer. In terms of neuroscience, as a card-carrying neuroscientist, of course I'm a little biased, but I always love showing this graph of how neuroscience particularly over the past few years has had this exponential growth. So when we think about neuroscience, neurology, all of these related fields, it's really a great niche area to be in just because of the activity around it and some of the programs that we have for funding in terms of HEAL. Many of you probably, raise your hands, have heard of HEAL, the initiative for pain, opioids, also the ADRD, Alzheimer's, and age-related dementia, other just really active brain initiative, active fields in terms of funding, but also the science itself is growing because of the technology and the tools. And we see that reflected with the number of PhDs that are now choosing neuroscience as a discipline. And so as we think about the numbers that we have there, what really is great for the work that I do is that unlike certain areas where diversity, and we should just say that across the board, in biomedicine itself, diversity, not only racial, ethnic underrepresentation, persons with disability, but also gender is an issue across biomedicine. But what gives me hope is that because neuroscience is such a burgeoning, growing field that's experiencing this exponential growth, we think that you can have the critical mass if we can create the change that we need to actually make a difference. And so why diversity matters to NIH. As was mentioned, I've been at the NIH for a while, and I've seen over time, not as fast as I'd like it to go, but I certainly have seen changes over time in terms of how we even talk about diversity. When we used to talk about diversity and training in the NIH, it really was this discussion of the benefit to the person. We need to bring in more diverse people so that they can have the same rights to pursue the same dreams that everyone else wants to pursue. But what we really realize now from scientific studies and really looking at the benefits of inclusion in environments is that it actually makes the science better. This is research that I think has long been shown in terms of companies and corporations, but now taking a closer look in the environments of labs and clinical trials and studies, we really know that diversity results in higher quality scientific research, and that it makes sense to really recruit the talented researchers from all groups. It's just really a shame if we don't leverage the US intellectual capital. And then especially for clinical research, the lack of diversity in the physician scientist workforce has really become a primary challenge to studying and helping to recruit to make beneficial research as well. So I've said diversity a few times, and what I'll say is that, we'll talk on a couple of levels of diversity and inclusion, but then of course this being the government, there are federal definitions with our targeted programs in terms of who would be eligible for those diversity programs. And so when we talk about the diversity programs, the NIH definition of diversity is still pretty inclusive. So first, it's individuals from underrepresented racial and ethnic groups. Most of the data that people show is NSF data showing that underrepresentation, but we've also had case-by-case basis of people making an argument for how they are underrepresented. So the groups that you usually think about are African Americans, Hispanics, Native Americans, Pacific Islanders, but then, like I said, there's also some other subgroups that can make the case and the argument for underrepresentation in biomedicine or neuroscience specifically for our institute. We also include individuals with disabilities, and that's defined as those with a physical or also a mental impairment. And then also individuals from disadvantaged backgrounds. And for most of the programs that we run, that case can most convincingly be made for high school and undergraduate candidates, because the running joke is once you get to grad school, we're all pretty much disadvantaged, so that would just be everybody. The other group that, particularly for some of or one neuroscience FOA in particular, has been included is women. So what you'll see, and on the next slide, is that for women in neuroscience, we tend to do pretty good for graduate school, even for postdoc. But then when you get to that junior faculty in the later stages, you see the drop off too. And so for some of our more senior career stages, FOAs, and particularly career development programs, we've been able to make the case that not only for women that fall in the 3 bullets above, but women only can apply for those programs. And so this should be no surprise to anyone in the room. What we see is that for diversity, it really does decline as you go along the career path. I don't know if you can see there. So what we're showing is in yellow, women that are underrepresented, and the darker or a little bit of orange, we're showing women well represented, and then the men are in blue. For the light blue, you have men that are underrepresented, and for the darker blue, men who are well represented. And if you just look along the line, like I said, just what I just said, for even women who are well represented, it looks pretty good until you start to get to the, you get out of the training phase, and then you see this drop off. And then unfortunately for the underrepresented groups, they tend to start off small, but then get even smaller. And so that's what the work is. The work is to change that, to show that, there's no reason that the people that come into training can't maintain that love of science and fulfill what they want to do in research. And so we create programs that really help along those transition points. The current thought is that each time you have to rethink whether I should be doing this or not in terms of research. That's where we sort of get this drop off along the pathway. And so the goal here is to really create seamless transitions for those who do want to stay. And that's fully recognizing that not everybody wants to, but for those who do want to, we try to create an environment and programs and support to help them do just that. And so this slide really just goes over all of the training and career development programs that I have. Today I won't touch on any of the Physician Researcher Awards. Steve Korn, my colleague, he's going to be coming, I think tomorrow, and he'll spend, I'm sure, time talking about those programs. The programs that I'll highlight today are going to be the ones in blue, or not blue, purple rather. Those are the diversity targeted programs. But what you can see is that really at NINDS we have a real good mapping of programs to help you and support you along the whole career pathway. And that's diversity targeted programs, but then if you look at the other programs, equally as well, the general programs. Training is something that our specific institute takes very seriously. And hopefully you get a sense of that from not only myself, but like I said, Steve Korn as well, who will be coming to the meeting later this week. So one of the programs that I'll highlight that can really help with that transition across career stages, but then also as a support to get someone into research, especially if you're coming from, say, a more MD-focused background and you need time to focus on the research, is the research supplements to promote diversity. It really has become a feeder program for us and a bridge to transition. How this works is that if you identify a mentor that has existing NIH research grants, and it could be an RP or even a cooperative agreement, a U, they can apply for a supplement to support you and mentor you in the laboratory. And the funding for that includes the salary and fringe benefits, but also funds for supplies and travel. And as I said, it really bridges a person who qualifies for one of those diversity definitions to get the research that they need, but also the preliminary data to then go apply for one of their own individual awards. Specifically for people that are, like I said, maybe coming from a background that has been more clinical oriented, or in terms of not having a lot of research exposure, what I've seen is that they've also been able to leverage this at the junior faculty level, which is usually pretty hard for somebody that's coming from just a straight hardcore PhD background. Reviewers tend to frown on that. We want you to, you've been doing research for a long time now, you should have your own research project. versus someone who's maybe an MD, PhD, who's been trying to balance both and is using this award to leverage that time to focus on the research. And so there could be two flavors of this. It could be a short-term investigator research supplement, say perhaps a person is at a teaching intensive school and they really just have time to do this during the summer, they can apply for it. Or on the other hand, maybe, someone who's doing clinical work only has time for the summer, they could apply for the short term. The long-term investigator research supplement, how NINDS views it, is that this has to be a person that's recently appointed within 24 months. And the project should really help this person then compete for their own independent grant support. And in the case of a physician or someone who's working on a clinical trial, this could be then using this to leverage to a K08 or a K23. But in there, you're really talking about why you need this supplement to bridge it and why you can't just go for the K now. And so very quickly, does anybody have any pre-docs or mentees or post-doc mentees? Okay, so no, but I'll just put this out there really quickly. This is our new Dspan award that goes across from pre-doc to postdoc. This is funding, 6 years of funding that someone could take with them from the pre-doc to postdoc. So if you do know someone, this is a great program to talk about. It's relatively new. It's only in its second year, so we're trying to get the word out about it, but it's a great opportunity. The other career development awards that we have are the K22 and the K01. So these are both diversity targeted. The K22, once again, under that theme of transition, goes from postdoc to faculty. It's a 5-year award. You can have 2 to 3 years for the postdoc, and then whatever you have left over, you take as money with you to your first faculty position. The K01 is for a first-time faculty person. You have to be less than 3 years in the first-time faculty position, and this gives you up to 5 years, but a check-in at the end of the 3rd year to just make sure you're doing everything you need to do in terms of submitting for an R01. This is really to help with that, the seeding of pilot funds and time to get you to that R01 faster. And then the other career development award that we have that's transitional in nature is the BRAIN Initiative, K99R00. And this is under the umbrella of that new initiative that is focused on tools, developments to understand brain circuits. And this one I highlight because not only does it have the groups that I talked about before, but this is the one that also includes women as a whole group in terms of eligibility. And that's really based on the fact that with the BRAIN Initiative, you have science, not only your card-carrying neuroscientists, but you have engineers, you have computer science, you have statistics, mathematics, physics, chemistry, and then also neuroethics. So especially for the engineering, computer science, and physics, we know that women, even in the graduate stage, aren't showing up as 50%. So we were able to make the argument for the inclusion. This is also a newer program that we've really been trying to promote and get out there. And this is much like the general K99R00, you apply for it while you're at your postdoc, and then once you get that first junior faculty tenure position, you then activate the R00. What's different than the general K99R00 is that this is 5 years, so the cutoff is 5 years of postdoctoral experience. The other one is 4 years, so you have a year more of time, which is great. In terms of all of the programs that I mentioned, we have resources there to help you put together an application. It's on the website up here. And we have archived webinars where either we're going through just the application components, or other webinars, the flavor is we've invited people that have actually received the awards, and they take you through their boots on the ground sort of perspective on how to put an application together. We also have tip sheets that are based on the summary statements, so we've gone through those and all of the weaknesses that have been identified. We try to tell you what they are, so that hopefully they're not your weaknesses. You can find new ones, but you shouldn't replicate these ones that come over and over again. And so we try to put out tip sheets so that we can help with that. And so that portion of the talk is really letting you become aware of some of the mechanisms that we have out there. And on this slide, I also am showing you at the NINDS website how you can search based on not only where you are in terms of type of research, pre-doctoral, postdoctoral, clinician, scientist, faculty, but then say you come to this page and you already know I'm looking for information on the K, you can then search by mechanism. And so this is really all of the information in a one-stop shop. And so that's one of the, because I promise you we talk about strategies. So that's one of the strategies is the money, right? So mechanisms for money to increase diversity and inclusion. But when we think about how do we do this in a really holistic way, it really is a systemic approach in terms of not only thinking about the individual, but thinking about the institution and then also the scientific community. Because as scientists, we don't, I think the stereotype in the cartoons of the lone scientist in the lab by themselves really is not true. It really is a system. And so in terms of increasing diversity, we have to approach it as a system. So at the scientific community level, some things to think about are that diversity is not an end in itself, right? So when we talk about diversity, sometimes we can think about, we have a nice goal, we have a motto, and we're done. It really is a means of achieving our ideal institutions, learning environments, and communities. The quote at the bottom, I think, really captures that. Diversity is being invited to the party, but inclusion is being asked to dance. So what we're saying is that merely adding diverse people to a homogeneous environment does not automatically create a welcoming situation. So when you're thinking about diversity at the scientific community level, what we should be doing is really practicing inclusion, not just diversity by the numbers. And so some examples of that have been, I don't know who's been to a Gordon conference recently, but they have Gordon Research Conference Power Hours, where they talk about this level of inclusion, not only for minorities, but women as well and other underrepresented groups. And I think that's a welcome conversation. The other thing is that at the NINDS, we've really thought about this in a specific way in terms of our R13 programs. So those are workshop programs where we really look at the appropriate representation that someone is putting forth. And that's not only for the participants, but the panelists as well. And on this slide, I'd just like to highlight, you may have heard that in terms of Francis Collins now, in terms of not accepting invitations anymore to manels. So that's all male panels. That's something that he has spoken about. And then our Institute Director, Dr. Walter Koroshetz, just recently released a blog as well, saying that, if he's invited to meetings or to conferences or to workshops, that he'll look at the agenda. And if it's all male, he probably won't attend unless there's some really, 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 really strong justification. And so I think also by saying that publicly in this world of social media, he will be reminded of that if he ever does. So I think those are things that at a scientific community level we can think about. The other thing that, I really am happy that we seem to be getting to this point is that at the scientific community level, we should all remember that we're scientists, right? And so that we should never lose our scientific logic just because we're discussing diversity. So that N of 1 is not evidence for a group behavior. Please don't tell me about the one person you got from the one school that was horrible that summer and now you'll never take another person from X school. That's not very scientific. The other thing is being willing to experiment with change. To say, well, we've always done it this way and that's how we've gotten the best people. That really, no, maybe you don't know who you left out by doing it the way you're doing it. And it's okay to experiment with change and to have the change maybe not initially yield the results that you thought it would yield. That's science, right? You would experiment and then you would see what you needed to tweak and you would do something maybe different. We should be willing to do that with diversity and inclusion as well. The other thing is that as scientists, we solve tough, complex research questions every day. It's amazing to me. People will say, well, this diversity thing is just too hard. I don't think we can solve this. We've been trying for years and the numbers just don't move. We've been trying to cure cancer. We've been trying to cure a lot of things that are hard. Increasing diversity in the workforce is probably one of the easiest things we can do. It's still hard, but it's certainly not a reason to not do it. The other thing that I love hearing is, as we talk about, really checking ourselves. So especially as neuroscientists, we know how the brain works and functions. It makes sense why bias exists or why, in terms of interacting with people, our brain automatically tries to think of a way to put a person in a box. It's probably a very natural thing. We can't be babies acting in amazement to everything that comes before us, right? We don't usually have the time for that. So it makes sense, and that's why it's an effort to acknowledge that we all have biases, but that we check them. We check ourselves and we say, oh, well, am I making an assumption about this? That's normal. But sometimes I'll have a conversation and someone will say, well, I don't believe in implicit bias. And the reaction is, well, it believes in you. It's kind of it's not like Santa Claus. It doesn't, it's true. So you can believe in it or not, but you don't have to. I like this quote. The key isn't to feel guilty about our biases. The guilt tends towards inaction. We all have biases. What matters is how we act upon them. And so that's just something that I myself think about in terms of interaction with new groups, new situations, or people, just to make sure that you're checking what your assumptions are about this person before you actually know them. And so in terms of types of implicit bias, there are a few. So it's the similar to me bias, means preferring people who are like us. I meet someone from Philadelphia, I automatically have a warm feeling towards them. A false correlation is seeing a relationship between things when the relationship doesn't exist. I think we've all had that. A confirmation bias means looking for or interpreting information to confirm our own preconceptions. Some group is always like this, and then that one person from that group does that, and so we say, yep, that's what they do. And all of these are biases that somehow, as scientists, we think don't exist in bias. That's for engineering, or that's for other work sectors. But the truth is, we are humans, and it exists in biomedicine as well. These types of implicit bias can especially come into play when there's a lack of critical mass. This creates a greater reliance on that implicit bias. And so you can imagine how in science this comes into play when certain groups definitely don't have a critical mass. And then what happens is that there's an accumulation of disadvantage. So a small bias in some direction has a large effect over time. And what isn't said is that there's also an accumulation of advantage as well for some groups. In terms of countering bias, some of the strategies that in the literature have been shown to minimize the effect is really slowing down, which, that's hard to do because we're all busy people. We all have bought into the false thing that we can multitask, and so we're trying to do a million things at once. But really slowing down when we're busy, distracted, or under time pressure, helps to mitigate some of that. Also, increasing the intergroup contact. the more contact you have with others, the less biases tends to be held towards this group. Engage in perspective taking. That's really, talking through it yourself as a member of a different group. And then for situations where you have the power, whether in your research group or your lab, or say you're just sitting on a panel that's making decisions, is to really encourage and conduct blind review, which is really hard in science because we tend to have a pedigree. It tends to be really, somebody who knows somebody else. So that can be a bit trickier. But then the thing that you can do, if you can't do that, is to really define the qualifications before starting the review. And that really, is something that I think we have a hard time with doing as scientists. We tend to feel like we'll interview somebody, we'll get to know them, and then the decisions that we make, as we talk about them, we can justify our decisions always we can. So really having a metric and a template that everybody goes through the same process really helps to put some of that in check. And then the other thing is focusing on the individual, consciously avoiding the tendency to make assumptions about others based on their group membership or vice versa. What I've heard from some of my Asian or Hispanic colleagues is, someone saying to them, where are you from? If you wouldn't ask someone else that question, then you probably should ask them that question because you're making some assumptions. And then promote inclusive communities. Work to ensure that everyone has a voice and acknowledge and attribute ideas accurately and discuss issues as a community. Something that I believe it was under the Obama administration was something that women did in smaller groups, so that they felt as though sometimes their voices weren't necessarily being heard as well as the men. And what they did, they ended up amplifying each other. And so that meant if Sue said something and someone kind of didn't really acknowledge it and skipped over, then Stephanie would repeat what she said, attributed it to her, and then say it again. And so amplification and being a good ally is sometimes really important as well. The other things that we've seen in terms of the data, in terms of diversity and inclusion, is really being very intentional about mentorship. So from several studies, what we've seen in terms of uneven mentorship is that one research study did sort of this blinded test where they made mentorship requests, and some of the people were well-represented groups, some were underrepresented groups, and all of them included women. And what happened was all of those groups were more likely to be ignored than the requests for this mentorship from white men. And when they talked to these mentors, these were fine people that even perhaps had diversity in their labs, but just getting that email without knowing the person, that's how it shook out. In terms of, as a group, the research also shows that scientists from underrepresented groups typically receive less mentoring than their well-represented peers. And thirdly, that recommendation letters based on gender reveal different tendencies. And this is whether the letter writer is female or male. And what happens is that these recommendations for the women, they talk about their kindness, about them being team players, and all of these other things. But while the male letters tend to show positives about, ownership and intelligence, and all of these strong autonomy words that if you're hiring, of course you'll prefer that. And so that's something that, if you have a mentor, you have someone who is going to be writing a recommendation for you, it's something to once again check your bias and make sure that you're not making those same sort of habits in terms of how you write about women versus males. Because while you're doing that, you may think you're doing a great thing in terms of talking about a woman's ability to play well and be a team player and all of this other stuff, but you don't realize you could be downplaying her sense of autonomy and ability to lead the research, because that's what the reviewers are looking for. That's what the the person who's going to give that K award is looking for. It's nice if you're nice, but they want someone who's going to lead this project, and that's the traits that you should play up. And what we know is that in terms of sponsorship, there's a bit of a difference too. So being very careful when you're connecting mentees to power through award nominations and membership and professional networks. That's something that you should think about as a mentor in terms of who you're nominating, who are you putting forth. Does it seem like you're always putting forth a male name versus a female name? You might want to check that. In terms of things that we've been trying to do in terms of building a network and helping scientific communities really reach out and get this diversity and inclusion, I'll just highlight really quickly the R25 program, which I think this is funded by, right, Robin? Yeah, so in terms of how we use the research education grant, which is the R25, it's all pretty much all different flavors. And so in the diversity space, we use it for summer research experiences. There's actually an undergraduate one that they then go on to PhD programs. And then the last one is really focused on these transitions at the later career stages. So graduate, postdoc, and even junior faculty. And so the one program that I'll highlight is the Transcends program. I don't know how many of you have heard that, so I see a few nods. They're actually taking applications right now, so I just want to put this up there for those who may be interested. But this is a great R25 program. It has a partnership with AAN, brings people in, they can get MS certificates, and then there's a host of other activities at the AAN meeting in terms of mentorship and support in terms of developing grant applications. The other network, now that I've told you how bad mentoring can be, I'll tell you some resources that hopefully you're all in situations with great mentoring. But if you're not, or if you feel like you just need more of development of a mentoring network, that's what the National Research Mentoring Network is there for. These are virtual mentorships that happen over the computer, but then there are also trainings that one could apply for in person. They even have a program that if you develop a K or an R grant application, they'll take you through 3 months in terms of developing that and getting mock grant study sections and feedback. So this is a great resource for people. And as you can see, it goes all the way from undergraduate to faculty level, and they even have resources for administrators as well. So we've talked a lot about the sort of at this scientific community level. The next step is at the institutional level. And I think what we know there is that senior leadership really sets the tone in terms of what happens in terms of diversity and inclusion. What gets measured gets done, and what gets rewarded gets repeated. So oftentimes I'll talk to people that are trying really hard within their environments at a very personal level to change the academic environment and the climate. But over time I've seen that you really do need senior leadership to back you up and to really set this tone. That's important. The other thing that matters is measuring the institutional climate and the cultural awareness. I think you can find out a lot of information at your institution that maybe you just aren't aware of because it doesn't impact you. But asking those questions really matter. Also, making diversity goals explicit. They shouldn't be a hidden secret, and really foster the development of strategies to achieve those goals. So it's nice to have goals, but if you don't have a way for people to actually accomplish them, it could just really be disheartening. The other thing is, once again, putting on our scientist hat, starting an activity, it's really important to not change the variables or the criteria for measurement midway through an experiment. So really, like I said, creating a standard by which you're going to have and conduct things when it comes to inclusion, when it comes to positions, creating a rubric for interviewing and for internal awards to make sure that everybody can be included, and that it's not just relying on self-nomination, which we know that even for, when it comes, not even talking about minorities, but just for women alone, we tend not to self-nominate. Also, developing strategies to address unearned advantage and also unearned disadvantage. And then really making sure that people become allies and advocates for inclusive practices. What happens a lot is that for women and also for diverse groups, when it comes to some of these challenges, we are tasked with being on the committee to solve said challenges. And so that doesn't always feel fair. There definitely has to be other rooms or other voices in the room to put forth the charge for these inclusive practices. It shouldn't just be women and minorities who find the inclusion valuable. In terms of tools for this, currently we have a Chief Officer for Scientific Workforce Diversity. This person reports to Francis Collins at the NIH, and they've developed an NIH Scientific Workforce Diversity Toolkit. And the toolkit really has examples and ways to go through recruitment search protocols, tips for reducing implicit bias. And if you contact them, they're willing to go through the toolkit with you and also to share even more resources than are available on the website. So this is something that I think was developed as early as I think it was last year, has been helpful to people in terms of trying to increase diversity in their searches and hires. And so we've talked at the scientific community level, institutional level, and now we're at the individual level. Here, and this applies for everyone. I mean, this is really just what I would call training advice, or people that are in the early stages of their career, things that, I've seen. Really, putting on your oxygen mask first. Make strategic decisions about extra service burden. Specifically for minorities and women, we could be asked to be on a lot of things. And you really need to decide, does this help my personal growth as well as fulfill perhaps an outreach or a passion that I'm trying to make things better so that people don't have to go through what I went through, but making sure that it's a strategic decision of about how it impacts your work and your research. Also, confronting and managing any potential, I don't know how many of you have heard about this imposter syndrome, where people can feel as though I'm here, but I shouldn't really be here. Really realizing that, unless you're sort of a psychopath, it's always, people have that. You always feel like I could be doing better, or I could, but you have to manage it. It can get out of control, but to really confront that and manage that, that you deserve to be where you are. The other thing is asking for help. Whether it's issues with experiments, lab dynamics, or personal issues, chances are someone has gone through it before and can offer solutions or support. And so one of the things about programs like the Mentoring Network or other programs where people aren't maybe at your home institution, it's always good within your mentoring network to have someone maybe not so close to where you are, so you can ask those questions and feel as though you can get that feedback. And so once again, the next bullet is network. To get that supportive network, you have to put yourself out there and take the time to meet people outside of your institution. The other thing is really don't assume your own roadblocks or assume constraints. It's easy to do that when you're junior in the field. I think the best rule that I've ever heard is let someone tell you no instead of saying no to yourself first. And then the other bullet is incorporating the platinum rule. Who's heard of that? So everyone knows the golden rule. You treat someone like you want to be treated yourself. And just recently, probably like 2 years ago, I heard the platinum rule, which I actually like a lot better. The platinum rule is you treat someone how they would like to be treated. And that's a very different thing. And it's a very powerful thing that I think if we did that more, that would lead to a lot more understanding and better relationships. Also at the individual level, what I'd say is to really empower yourself. Empower yourself to ask questions, but do your homework. Empower yourself to seek the mentorship you deserve that's right for your strengths and weaknesses. Empower yourself to leave toxic environments and situations. I think we've heard a lot at the NIH recently about sexual harassment or just gender harassment. So really making sure that you leave places that, that drain your spirit and really don't capitalize on your intelligence. Also empower yourself to own your career. Don't be passive about your journey. Information won't fall from the sky. You really do have to take an effort to prepare yourself for your next steps. And it's okay to have a plan that doesn't go as planned, but you need to have a plan. So also being open to change is fine as well. Also empower yourself to follow your passion. You are an N of one. What I say, especially in this space of diversity, is that a lot of times when it comes to the data that we show in terms of representation, it is often very small. And it can be a little bit disheartening, but I always say, you are an N of one. You choose your own journey. You can't go based on aggregate numbers. And the fact is that not everyone will believe in your talents or even believe that you belong in science. But there will also always be people, and I've found that in my own journey, that will be there to support you. And sometimes it can be some, I guess, natural human sort of almost way of focusing on the negative versus, you focus on those one or two people that have said ignorant microaggressions to you, instead of focusing on the mentors and the people that are around you that are there to support you. And so sometimes it's just shifting your frame of reference about what to focus on. And so the final part of the talk, I'm going to throw out some really, what I think are important resources and NIH policies that you should know that I find that maybe a lot of people don't know. And so I'll put them up here, and hopefully in the back of your mind when you need them, you'll at least know that they exist, and you'll Google how to find them if you're not taking pictures now. So the first thing is, this is the Office of Extramural Research. And so what I showed you before was the website for NINDS. But the Office of Extramural Research, that's under the big umbrella of NIH, also has a career development kiosk, a research training kiosk, a fellowship kiosk. So everything in terms of mechanisms and what we fund, you can find on this page. And then you can also look by career pathways. So you see it has a physician scientist graphic, even a dentist scientist graphic, all of these different pathways. So this is a really good resource to go to if you're not sure what institute you would land in. This has pretty much everything. The other thing that you want to be aware of as junior faculty is the NIH Early Stage Investigator Status, which we call ESI status. And so the definition is, this is an individual who qualifies as a new investigator and is within 10 years of completing their terminal research degree or completing the medical residency. This is really important because in the NIH world of pay lines and receiving grants, this allows you to say you put in an application and the pay line is a certain percentage. For ESIs, we usually reach at least 10 pay line, or 10 points above that. And so it's really an increased pay line for the R01 applications of early stage investigators. But you're in control of that status. So once you submit a grant, ERA Commons will have what your status is. You need to make sure that's accurate. And if it's not accurate, there's a process for having them change it. But you don't want to find that out after the application is submitted and reviewed. Then there's really nothing we can do to help you with that. You want to do this all before you submit the application. And this is for everyone. This isn't a diversity thing. This is for everyone with the ESI status. And this is different than a new investigator, because a new investigator, you could have someone who for 40 years was funded by HMI or maybe, Max Planck, and now this is their first NIH grant. The effort isn't really to help someone like that. The effort is to bring in junior faculty and early stage investigators to get to their R01 faster. So if you're in that situation, you want to make sure that you have the right ESI status. The other thing is that just recently, the NIH has decided that for childbirth, that they would automatically give an ESI extension of 1 year. And so that is something, usually you used to have to put all these formulas together to show how you took off time to give birth for the child. And for most women, they never really took off. So they took their 6 weeks and they were back. And so there's no more of that. You still have to go into the system and request the extension, but there's no more calculations. If you request an extension for the birth of a child, you will automatically get 1 year. Your clock will be extended by 1 year. And so this is something really important to know and something that's extremely valuable if this is your situation. The other resource that we have, and this comes out of the Center for Scientific Review, is the Early Career Reviewer Program. One of the things that, through all of the NIH studies, people realized that the thing that really helps the score of a grant, in addition to obviously the science, all these other things, but one of the things that can help someone is by actually serving as a reviewer. But usually people are in this catch-22. A study section is a panel of peer reviewers. And so by definition, this should be someone who has already received a grant. And so the question is, well, how do I get this experience that is so valuable to getting a grant if I've never had a grant? And so this program is an attempt to try and answer that. This is for junior faculty that, scientifically are very qualified or emerging researchers, but don't yet have NIH funding. You could apply for this. The thing that I will say is that they do get a lot of requests, and so it will matter that you'll have to wait until they have a review that could use your expertise. But when you do participate, I've found people say that this is an amazing experience. You'll have someone to sort of mentor you through the process, and you won't have the typical number of applications to review like the other study section reviewers. You'll have a very small subset, and someone will basically take you through it. But you do get that experience in terms of listening to the reviews, and seeing, sort of seeing how a review process works, realizing that applications aren't talked about for an hour each. That is actually a few minutes. And so just having that experience, people have said they found it very helpful. So this is something to look into. The other resource, NIH resource that I like to mention is the NIH Reporter. This is a database that contains everything that the NIH has funded. And here it has a matchmaker feature. It has a search feature by state, institution type, just a bunch of really valuable searches that will let you be able to say you have your specific aims and you want to know what are the other projects that are going on in my research area? Who's actually doing it? You can paste that in there and that information will come up. You can find out about potential collaborators or then also maybe just competition in the field. It will also help you to see, especially not so much for the Ks, because for a lot of the Ks, they all go to a sitting assigned study section. But once you start submitting R01s or R21s, it will help to show you which NIH study sections tend to review applications in your specific field. And then you can put that in your cover letter in terms of request. It doesn't mean you'll get your request, but at least you'll be able to have a more informed cover letter in terms of maybe directing your area of science to study sections where they tend to do well, because remember, these are the funded, these are the awards. And then the thing for the supplements, a lot of times I'll have people, say, I feel like I qualify for this diversity supplement. I know what type of research I want to do, but I don't know who already has a fund for me to ask for this supplement. And this could be a way that you can search and look for that too. The other NIH resource is the loan repayment program. So how many in the room already know about this? Okay, so a few, but it really, to me, if you're eligible for this, I don't see why you wouldn't apply. So this is up to $35,000 per year in educational loan repayment. And it depends on the debt level, but most people tend to have a lot of debt, especially coming through the physician researcher pathway. It can be 2-year initial contracts with 1 or 2 renewals. And basically all NIH institutes and centers participate in this. This is a program put forth by Congress. So congressionally, we're mandated to spend the money that we have for this. And that sort of explains the success rate that you see, with the applicant success rate being about 50%. So once again, I would, if you qualify for this, and these are the different research areas that are part of the loan repayment program, so clinical research, pediatric research, health disparities research, contraception and infertility research, and then the bottom one says clinical DB, and so that's disadvantaged backgrounds. That's more about the background of the individual, but the other 4 above are the research type. And so if you do have loans or debt, especially from, I believe it's medical school, then these are programs to think about in terms of applying. Because like I said, the success rate is 50%, which is pretty extraordinary for most NIH programs. The other resource is the guide. So the guide is something that contains all of the funding opportunities that have been published. You can get them daily, or you can get it weekly. Most people subscribe for weekly. And what this really does is it empowers you to have the information come to your mailbox about different funding opportunity announcements. Because a lot of the programs or the funding or the things that we put out there could be one-time solicitations. So we have requests for proposals. We have other programs that they come, and then once they're gone, they're gone. And so the saddest thing is that if someone calls you and says, I'm doing this very specific type of research, and you say, oh, that's a shame. They just released a set aside, which I don't know if you're used to that word, but that's set aside money to encourage people to apply for this grant, but the closing date was last week. And so by signing up for the guide, this information is just coming to your mailbox, and you'll always know about what's out there in terms of funding opportunities. Because even though we try to do outreach, I think this is a situation where there's just information overload for everyone in terms of information received, not only from the NIH, but others as well. And so a lot of it goes ignored. But if you know that this guide information is coming every week, and I'm going to look through it to see what funding opportunities could be relevant to me, you're more likely to catch it. So that's a recommendation as well. And so finally, I'll close with saying sort of how I started. The NIH institutes, we are organized in 27 institutes and centers. Each of us is charged with different things and have different missions. And so it really is important to contact us. It is not a problem. We want you to contact us. We want to have those conversations. I think all of the NIH staff in the room are people who are overwhelmingly very helpful folks and want to get you engaged and along the way in your pathway as junior researchers to your next step. And so hopefully you'll get that sense over this week of how vested we are and how we want to see you succeed. So contacting us, giving us the specific aims, having those conversations well in the advance is helpful. Contacting a week before something is due, probably not as helpful. We can't really give you the best of us. And a lot of the travel that we do, maybe we won't see it. So really, once again, empowering yourself to first do your homework, look at the deadlines, find the information, finding the fit for you, and contacting us is really important. And also, if you don't think it's us, we work with the other institutes, and we will do the handoffs. What sort of drives people crazy is if, at the, say the 5 other neuroscience institutes, we all get the same form letter. Sometimes that slows stuff down because we're trying to get you connected. So, give us a little bit of time. And then if you don't hear, then maybe, send to others. But that would be the most important thing in terms of, I would say, using your program officer is really having the conversation before the application goes in, and then following up after. In a perfect world, you submit it and then you get your award and you're on with your life. But in the reality of the world, you may need to resubmit. And so, once again, contacting your program officer, having the conversation about the summary statement is important as well, because that really is our job, and we are here to help. And so I'll close it there. I don't know if we have any time for questions.
Yeah, no. Let's thank Dr. I think we have time for some questions. I do have one. I can start. On the ESI extension, how many kids can you have?
I didn't know this, but it's for each kid. It's for each kid.
And then I guess the other side of that is, are partners inclusive of that, or just birther?
So the
I didn't mean to talk about birthers.
Let's go through. And so, in this I don't know, because I have only seen on our side them saying for childbirth. But what I will say is that because of this language, people have been asking questions about adoption or other, medical issues. You are still allowed to ask for the extension. But I don't want to tell you something wrong. The way it's written, it's for childbirth. But if you've taken time off as well, you can put in an extension. You can always request the extension. It just won't be this automatic thing. But yeah, we've gotten a lot of, pushback from people who adopt as well about the language. And if that's anyone in this room, you can still request it.
Thank you so much for all the resources that you brought to our attention. And it was interesting when you talk about diversity. But could you go back to that slide that you have the K01 and K07 eligibility criteria?
So the K01 and the K22?
Can do this one. So in this slide, you have a big restriction for your research, right? All your researchers that are in H1, in an EB or an O, that are foreigners, and for sure is your diversity, cannot apply to any of those NIH awards.
Well, that's actually, that's policy by law. So the one that people who are non-citizens can apply for is the K99. And that's a special, it was actually our NINDS Institute director who requested and allowed for that. So all of the other training fellowships, that has always been that way. Permanent resident status or citizenship is required. And that's sort of at the level of, once again, Congress, not so much an NIH decision.
If I remember correctly, though, that's not the case for RO1s.
No, training.
Just training.
Training.
Just training.
Training. RO1s, R21s, U's, anything at the level of, independent investigator status does not have that citizenship requirement. Only the training awards. But like I said, the K-99 is one of those rare exceptions that they were allowed to get, that you don't have to be a citizenship. You don't have to have citizenship.
Dr. Benson.
Yeah, just to sort of pick up on this issue, I'm just curious, can we do an experiment? Could we ask the foreign medical graduates to raise their hands? It's a good chunk. I don't know the numbers offhand, but in neurology residency programs, foreign medical graduates are a pretty high proportion.
40%.
40%? So if we're thinking as a sort of community about sort of career development and diversity, I don't know if we should be having a discussion about, lobbying Congress about changing this, because it's a significant impediment to young people's career growth. The American Academy of Neurology, for example, actually opens up their training programs to foreign medical graduates and people who are not citizens.
Yeah, and I think
But I
most
feel like
foundation awards do as well.
But the
I think
fact
if
that
you're just
K's
talking
voters-
about, if you're talking about federal dollars, that's where it gets tricky. But I think most foundation awards, they don't have to have that restriction. In terms of talking about the issue, I think the National Academy of Sciences, that next generation of neuroscience program, that was one of the bullets there in terms of thinking about ways to capitalize and to utilize the talent that is here that cannot apply currently for many of the federal government's training awards.
Because the other thing to say about the K-99...
I can't hear you.
Sorry, the other thing to say about the K-99 ROO, and I don't know whether it's an intentional gap, but for clinical investigators, in a sense, it really doesn't apply. Because these are postdocs sort of moving into faculty. And if you're a clinical investigator, you're typically a fellow or a junior faculty looking to establish yourself, and you're kind of ineligible for that K-99 ROO. And so I wonder whether there's been any discussion about that mechanism, but for people who are on a clinical track, coming out of a clinical training and wanting to become clinical investigators.
I would add that I believe that's the case for the KO1 also. I believe that's that same case is made for the KO1. So for the clinician underrepresented candidate, the KO1 doesn't really apply.
And so for the diversity K01 and the diversity K22, those are written with an eye towards PhDs. The thought is that if you're a physician researcher, the better path is a K08 or the K23. But once again, like you said, that really doesn't take into account if you're not even eligible because you don't have the permanent resident status or the citizenship.
Any other questions? Certainly vote. Talk to your congressman.
If you see a presidential candidate.
Well, I'm glad you said that. I was toying with whether or not to make the comment that asking a federal employee whether you should lobby the government is probably not a productive line of thought. Okay.
No, but like I
correct
said,
me if I'm wrong, but
I think it's also a strength to look what's currently going on. This isn't a new problem. It's not something that's been brought up for the first time. There are groups that are advocating for it. The one example I gave you was the National Academies of Science. They have a committee put together for that. Also, what is the other group? I think, I don't know, a lot of scientific societies already have a lobbying arm that it would make sense to work through them because they already have the ear of people who they could get on the agenda. I just, in terms of this topic, it's not the first time I've received these questions, so I don't think you need to start a grassroots effort. I think you could plug into activities that are ongoing.
All right. Well, thank